Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. And I am the interlocutor today for Chairman Nichols. We have had many of these conversations, usually over cell phones as we're each driving in different directions, but we've touched on many of the topics over many years that we're going to talk about today. And so, Mary, are you ready? Shall we get started?
Let's go.
Any opening comments, or shall I begin my question?
Ask me a question.
All right. So global warming is no longer at sort of the forefront of many politicians' thinking these days. It's fallen off the top 10 of the public's interest. So I don't know how to say this, but isn't it time for California to maybe relax on this issue a little bit?
Well, Diane, I want to put this discussion in a broader context. When we examine something as common and basic as the air we breathe, we are confronting not only an environmental issue or even an economic issue, we are confronting a basic moral question about our own values, our social definitions, and the values we project to the rest of the world.
Well, that's putting it in a high moral context, and I appreciate that. But if you're going to raise it to that level, it also has to fit into ideas of world hunger and clean water and diseases, population growth. Could you address that?
Sure. I see the clean air debate and the global warming debate as a great opportunity to deepen our commitment as a people to values that that benefit us all and that benefit generations that follow. You know, Gregory Bateson said that mankind would destroy itself unless it could correct at least one of three characteristics of our modern civilization. First, the Western idea of man and the values associated with these concepts. Two, modern technology. And three, rapidly growing population. He said we did not have to correct all three. We just had to correct one of them. So in that context, our own assumptions get right to the heart of the problem. They get to the heart of our goals as a people. Most of the opposition to taking action on global warming is based on the cost. Problems of red tape, problems of regulation. We hear that it's just too expensive and that we ought to allocate our money to something else. That something else is producing more goods for people, but what about the air we breathe, the common resource on which all human beings depend? Shouldn't they have a preeminent value? Our society is the richest in the world. Certainly it must take the lead in setting the proper balance between individual comfort and our long-term survival and social values.
Mary, we all know you very well. You don't usually read things. What are you reading?
Well, as it happens, Diane, I have here in my hand a brochure which is the printed text of remarks that were given by the Honorable Edmund G. Brown, Jr., Governor of California, to the National Conference on the Clean Air Act at the University of Southern California, March 6, 1981. I was there. I heard that speech. Thank you.
Here's to the governor.
And thanks to my Crackerjack Communications Department, I actually have obtained a copy of it. This is a very rare and valuable document because everybody who's ever heard Governor Brown speak knows that he does not speak from a written text. Someone actually recorded this and then had it printed up after the fact. I was in the audience for this speech. In fact, I was organizer of this conference. And I was trying at that time to get the governor to say some very specific things about what we wanted in reauthorizing the Clean Air Act. And we had Henry Waxman there. We had a host of local and state politicians. We had business representatives, environmental group representatives. And instead, he goes off and he gives this speech about global leadership. And, you know, talks about how generations to come won't forgive us if we don't do something to take action. And I just remember standing there thinking, well, there goes the speech I wrote, and, you know, there goes, you know, our efforts to try to maneuver everybody into position. But, you know, once again, as has happened so often in my life, I was wrong. I underestimated, I think, the value of having an elected political leader who will take the moral high ground and stick to it. And so I wanted to take advantage of this opportunity, which you have given me, to insert some of these words here, because I know that many people are always asking the question, and some of them ask me, so is the governor really committed to this? You know, what is he really doing? What does he really think? And, you know, is he going to change course along the way? And I just think it's helpful to remind ourselves that we're dealing in California with an issue, with a cause, and, in fact, with a political leader who's been at this for a long time and who hasn't wavered.
I think Mary does a very good job at channeling the governor.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I do still have hair, but...
And you're younger.
Yeah, that's true.
So let's continue being the governor here for a second. So as California is launching its cap and trade program, more conversation bubbles to the top about, well, maybe this should be a carbon tax program rather than a cap and trade. I thought that decision had been made, but obviously not. So where are you and the governor on that issue?
Well, one of the things that we said from the very beginning when we started working on the cap and trade rule and were always being asked, why can't you do the same thing either with more regulation or with a tax, that the answer, I guess I could be quoting our president now, is all of the above. Personally, I would love to see a carbon tax at the U.S. level. I was a big supporter of Al Gore's tax when he made his ill-fated effort to get something through the U.S. Congress. But if there's one thing we know about Americans, it's that they hate taxes. And we've had no success in getting tax policy used in a way that would assist. Regulation, we're already doing it. Our scoping plan under AB 32 shows that most of the emissions reductions, about a little over 80% of all of the carbon and other greenhouse gases that we are working to take out of the atmosphere, are going to come from specific targeted regulations, with our vehicle emission standards at the very top of the list, but also including low carbon fuel standard, mandatory efficiency audits, and a host of very specific regulations on things like refrigerants. So we're doing everything that we can think of to do that makes sense in regulation. The cap and trade program, which is the thing that's the most talked about because it's the newest and therefore it's easy to scare people about or misinterpret, is in many ways the last piece of this pyramid that we're building here. But it's also one that affects everything else, because by setting the cap, obviously we have our target in place. We know how many tons we're trying to get. We know what the absolute limit is. And in effect, and this is one of the things that the business community is now saying, if they have to purchase allowances, which eventually they will, we're starting the program giving away most of the allowances, but over time this transitions and starts in the beginning even with a small auction, then isn't that just a tax? Isn't that just the same thing as a tax? Well, this is a legal argument, which I'm sure we'll be getting into later. We don't believe it's a tax. We think it's a fee, and that's a very important distinction. But the reality is it's a charge, it's a price on carbon, and so you're accomplishing the same result that you would get from a carbon tax. So it's a really long-winded answer, but I think that the point is that people need to look at this in context and see that it's not an either-or proposition. We're really doing, carbon is so embedded in our economy, it is so much a part of everything we do, that you can't just take one simplistic program and make that the answer to everything.
Well, you can't stand alone either. And you've talked about leadership, and you've talked about the fact that the cap and trade is really going to kick off now. Who do you see are the other leaders here in North America and maybe even globally who are also going to support California, follow it, partner with it in cap and trade? Quebec, I know.
Well, when we launch the first auction this year, we expect we will have already linked our allowance system to Quebec, and we thank them and we appreciate them very much for their leadership. We have a number of other Canadian provinces that we are continuing to work with. who are at various stages of implementation of their own cap-and-trade programs. And within the United States, as I think everybody knows, the WCI, the Western Climate Initiative partners, have in various ways pulled back from their readiness to launch into a cap-and-trade program. Some of them have elected political leaders who have flat out said, we're never going to do this. Others are just more hesitant and waiting to see what's going to happen. And it is very much a state-by-state proposition. I think we can't predict exactly when and how other states are going to decide to join us. But when you look at the leadership that we're hoping for here, I would say a couple of things. And first of all, clearly, if by 2020 we don't have a government in the United States, and I would say a government in Canada as well, that have stepped up to the plate and adopted some form of national commitment to reduction of greenhouse gases and joined in some sort of an international program to accomplish this goal, then I would say our claims of leadership are not all that they were cracked up to be. I mean, we clearly, our intent here is to be superseded, to be lapsed, to be incorporated into something bigger. And it always has been. I mean, that's true of all of the programs that California has launched in the environmental arena, including our clean air programs, which were, things that we began and usually a couple of years later were taken up by the federal government. So, I believe that after the next presidential election, something like a Waxman-Markey bill is going to be on the table again, and it'll be a starting point for further discussions. I'm not saying that that bill is going to pass. I don't think it would. And frankly, it became so much of a regulatory vehicle. It was a burden in its own right, but it was a masterpiece of legislative craftsmanship, to put it mildly, and I think it will be a starting point for further discussions. So as far as California is concerned, we are actively talking to not only the states and provinces that I mentioned, but we've had very positive discussions with our friends in the RGGI states, particularly New York and Massachusetts, but Connecticut has a very active governor now and a very lively environmental commissioner who wants to compete with California in various ways. Massachusetts this year beat California for the first time ever in a national competition that's sponsored by the American Society for Energy Efficiency, and so they now have bragging rights, and we're, needless to say, determined that we're going to get back in again and challenging all the various criteria that were used to make this decision, which we don't think was right anyway, but that's okay. We can compete with each other, and then with both the EU and with Australia, we've had some very good conversations about the potential for linkage. There are real complexities in doing it. But the main thing is we have to get our program actually up and running. And when we've done that, then I think we'll be in a good position to start talking about other linkages as well.
Well, that was a great lead-in because I wanted to start digging a little bit deeper into the mechanisms and sort of the hows of AB 32. And after a few questions, I do want to say we'll open this to the audience. So if you have some burning question to ask Mary, you also will be invited to do so. But let me start by saying that you can't really have a conversation about AB 32 without some people talking about how many businesses will be driven out of the state because this regulatory hammer or atomic fly swatter or whatever they want to call it is just too much to handle. Do you see that businesses will leave because of this? I mean, I'm not suggesting the state will go under or anything, but...
Well, this is something we've been worried about, of course, from the beginning of the program, and I can guarantee you that the governor, who was elected in large measure to fix California's desperate budget situation, is asking me questions all the time about how we're accounting for, how we're thinking about impacts on business. I have to say that even though AB 32 was passed at a time of greater prosperity and greater optimism about the state of the California economy than may be prevalent today, the program, the bill would not have passed if it hadn't been for the very vigorous support of a large number of California businesses. Now, many of the leaders in that were companies from Silicon Valley, or they were investors in those kinds of companies, venture capitalists and so forth, people who saw opportunities for California, not just to lead in a political sense, but to provide a kind of legal and regulatory leadership and stability that would allow for people who have inventions, ideas, financial wherewithal to create the kind of businesses that are going to be what allows for this transition that we're talking about to a lower carbon economy to happen, and that California would be getting more than just moral high ground, that we would be gaining advantages as a first mover in this area. We still believe that, and we have evidence to document that in terms of actual companies that have moved to California, investments that have taken place here, patents that are being taken out in California.
Conferences that are being held here.
Conferences, yeah, look at that. We're giving our own little boost to the economy here. But you know, of course, you also have to worry in a major transformation of the economy, which is really what we're talking about in a very ambitious sense. AB 32 alone isn't going to do it. There are other things that are driving this change. But, you know, I don't want to say I feel sorry for the oil companies because they're doing pretty well, thank you. But I would say that, you know, if I were in the utility business, I would be giving a lot of thought to what my business was going to look like. And there's a lot of uncertainties out there and questions about, for example, my own hometown utility, LADWP, which is very heavily indebted to or involved with a big coal-fired power plant, which is a major supplier of electricity to California and the West. Complying with AB 32 for them is going to mean some major change in their source of electricity. You know, they're on a path to try to get there, but it's going to cost a lot of money, and they need rate increases. And so, you know, it's going to be a constant effort to maintain the support to do something like this. Now, utilities are not in a position to pick up and move, although they can build generating facilities, certainly out of state, and they do, and they buy and sell power all over the grid in the western United States. But for other kinds of businesses that may be heavily dependent on electricity for their businesses, then it's a challenge for them. And keeping the cost of doing business in California competitive, at least for the kinds of businesses that we naturally can compete for, which tend to be clean tech business. I mean, California isn't and isn't going to be, I think, ever a center for heavy polluting industries. We don't have any basic steel mills anymore in California. The Kaiser plant that was built in World War II, which was a serious big emitter, shut down many years ago. It wasn't competitive. We do make steel here, but we import a lot of the basic products. But what we do make here are software, movies, records, inventions, communications, and we build a lot of stuff too. We just build stuff that's clean. So I think that's the way California's economy goes anyway. People come here because they're attracted by the business climate, which may not be easy when it comes to getting permits to build something, but it's a good place to be if you're looking for intelligent, interesting, creative people and a very nice climate to work in, and we hope to stay that way.
Addressing the climate again. Okay, there's sort of a general consensus or feeling among people who know about the cap and trade program that there might be a shortage of offsets to really feed into the program. So could you talk about what your thinking is as you look forward about taking on offsets from different geographic regions, either in the United States or north or south of the United States, and also the new types of offsets you might find attractive in terms of categories?
Sure. I know a lot of people who are here because they're involved in offset creation or various aspects of use of offsets. And I think it's obvious that we've walked a pretty narrow line in terms of the use of offsets in the California program. We've tried to strike a balance between the forces that would prefer that there be no offsets and basically discredit the entire idea of offsets in this program, and people who think that we're being way too restrictive and that we should recognize without much further ado any offset that's been created under any kind of a reasonable program, and just allow for a much freer market in offset trading. We expect and we need offsets in order to moderate the price of allowances under our program. As the cap gets tighter, as the number of allowances is reduced between now and 2020, we know that there's going to be a need for offsets in order to help keep the price of allowances in line and keep the participants in the market in compliance. So we worry about whether there will be enough offsets. On the other hand, if there are too many offsets and they flood the market, that isn't good for the offset sellers, and it isn't good for the market either. It just discredits the whole program. So our path in this direction has been to keep very tight control over the quality of the offsets that we will accept. I mean, everybody sort of throws around the words additionality and enforcement and so forth, but we have taken that to a degree of rigor that we think people would expect of California. We want our offsets to be the prime offsets, just as when you were beginning at the registry, we talked about California's accounting protocols being the gold standard for accounting. That's where we're trying to be with respect to offsets. So where we are right now is that we have approved offset protocols, some of which have been used and are being used pretty well, and others which are hardly being used at all because apparently they're too difficult for people to figure out how to use. My personal favorite being the urban forestry protocol, which I'm still trying to get somebody to actually pioneer in moving some projects through that protocol. But in any event, where we go next is to try to approve some further protocols. And we've indicated the ones that we're looking at right now. So I don't have any new announcements to make this morning about it. But it's kind of a combination of things where we think California can benefit directly, which would be the ones that are focused on agricultural waste or conservation of California landscapes, where we would love to see investment and carbon being preserved here in California. And then more technically oriented protocols like the ozone, destruction of ozone depleting compounds, or looking at pneumatic valves and things where we can measure, monitor very clearly. We know that these things are being emitted into the atmosphere and that you can do something very directly. And those might not happen within the state of California, but we can feel very confident that we would be doing a service to the planet if we were to create an incentive for people to go out there and reduce those emissions. So that would be where we would be headed next. We are talking we're actively engaged in a process where we're talking with 2 other states internationally, the states of Chiapas, Mexico, and Acre in Brazil, both of which were chosen at the time, just several years ago when Linda Adams was leading this effort at Cali, PA, because they had quite advanced programs in the area of forestry, good state regulatory schemes, a lot of very smart, competent people who were working on ideas about how to preserve forest. And we are developing with those 2 states a path for how international offsets could be recognized in the California program. But despite, I know, a tremendous amount of enthusiasm and support for this idea, which I'm delighted to have, we always have to be pretty careful about not letting people think that the California compliance market is going to be the place where huge volumes of offsets are going to trade from international forestry projects, because we're just not big enough, and we're not going to be having that many offsets. But what we are hoping is that by, again, investing some of our staff time and commitment in this area, that we can help move the needle in terms of international forestry projects and of the offset market, which, again, eventually we hope is going to be a lot bigger than just California.
So what about the rumor that as a nod to Quebec, you're doing a kind of croissant and hot chocolate offset?
That would work for me, but maybe not for anybody else.
Okay. Well, I thought I would just ask. So now let's talk a little bit about money.
Okay.
So two questions. How much money do you anticipate might be flowing to the state from AB 32 implementation, and where might it be spent? People talk about improving the education of Californians, reopening the state parks, helping our budget deficit. What do you think?
Well, I'm a little bit stunned by the fact that it has taken people so long to wake up to the fact that there is actual money involved in this cap and trade business. I tried for several years to get the legislature to sort of anticipate this and to start working on what you could do with the revenue from the program. But be that as it may, now that the program is really at their doorstep, we do have a lot of interest on the part of political leaders, of course, in what's going to happen with this. First of all, most of the actual revenue from the program is going to flow through the utilities, and because the electric utilities are the major recipients of allowances in the first years of the program. And the direction of where that revenue is going to go is under the Public Utilities Committee for the Public Utilities Commission for the investor-owned utilities, or their governing boards for the publicly owned utilities. Either way, our directive to them is that they have to use that revenue for the benefit of their customers, both the industrial and commercial and residential customers. And we're actively engaged in those proceedings, but those are under the jurisdiction of these other entities. The only thing that we are confident of is that they will be doing their best to come up with an approach that doesn't eliminate the price signal that you want carbon reduced, but doesn't punish the ratepayers either. So we're looking at ways of making the investments be in things that will help, again, move this transition towards a lower carbon, more efficient economy. In the case of the money that comes to the state from the small auction that we're running, we have put out a list, and it's included in the governor's message to the legislature and in his budget, about where we think the money could be productively directed. From a procedural perspective, we expect that the funds will flow through the budget. That is, auction proceeds will come in to ARB, but we don't get to hold on to them. We don't even get to skim anything off the top. We just put it directly into an account, and then together with the finance department and the governor, will present a spending plan, and the legislature will do what they wish to do with it and then appropriate the money. But it'll be going through a normal budget process. As far as what's eligible to be funded, though, I think it's pretty clear to all that this money, because it is a fee and it's being extracted from the people who are under the cap and trade program, it has to be used for the purposes of reducing carbon emissions. So that's a pretty broad spectrum, but it includes, it would not include probably reopening the parks or, adding more teachers to the classrooms, both of which are things I'd love to see us do, but those would not be eligible expenses. On the other hand, projects that have both a mitigation and an adaptation benefit to them, which could include some of the natural resources programs, could be eligible for funding. And, at the end of the day, obviously this will be a very political process, given that the governor and the legislature have to agree on it. But I believe that all understand that the goal here is to use this revenue in ways that will advance the cause of making our state ahead of the curve when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay, I have one more question I'm going to ask Mary, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience. When you do ask your question, I'd like you to state your name and affiliation.
There's a microphone.
There's a microphone right here. So Mary, so the law was passed for AB 32, the regulations were formed, the recall was tried. It seems like the only thing left between now and implementation that might slow it down are lawsuits. So can you address any pending lawsuits, any fears you have that this program might be postponed, or where all that stands?
Well, I believe that AB 32 is going to continue to provide work for lawyers as long as it's in effect. So I'm not worrying about the legal profession finding things to do to challenge about our implementation of AB 32. We're very pleased that the period to sue us under CEQA passed without any lawsuits being filed, and that we were successful in disposing of the challenge to moving forward on the cap and trade program that came from that. We do have a lawsuit that was recently filed, although it hasn't been served yet, so we're not formally joined in this litigation. But the press release went out from a group of people who are positioning themselves as being in favor of taking action on climate change, but who are opposed to the use of offsets in the program. And again, I have not seen the complaint, although I've heard about it. Their lawyer talked to our general counsel. It's a challenge that's sort of based on the interpretation of the language of AB 32. I am a lawyer, and I've been around long enough to know that you can never predict what will happen in a court, but I would say we don't see that case as being one that's particularly well-grounded. We certainly intend to defend all these cases vigorously. We've had great support from the Attorney General's office, and I'm very pleased to say that really throughout the design of the cap and trade program, we've had representatives of the Attorney General who've worked with us on thinking through all the areas where there might be challenges. This began, of course, when Governor Brown was the Attorney General, but currently under Attorney General Harris, we're having the same kind of very close working relationship with all parts of the Attorney General's office. So, I think we'll just keep on as we have been, but doing our very best to make sure we stay out of trouble.
I don't know how many of you have watched or been part of any lawsuit with Mary on the other side, but she is not a passive hand-wringer when it comes to being attacked. She attacks back hard, fast, and usually effectively, so I'm interested in your attitude here on lawsuits. So let me open this up, and I see our good friend, Bud Beebe, who's really an expert on this topic, standing at the mic. So, Bud, do you have a question? Take some water.
Good morning.
I'll get
Yeah, well, when the lawsuits come, we're glad you're on our side. Really, thank you very much. I'm Bud Beebe with SMUD, and the analysis that Sarah Horowitz and her group at UCLA put together to put these prioritizations of what constitutes a use of money from the auctions that is AB 32 compliant, if you will. In addition to the lists, I guess they're lists of potential projects or things that could be done with that money that the ARB is making available to the legislature, it occurred to me when I read the Horowitz analysis that we're going to get a lot of legislative imaginary carbon reduction programs, like paving over roads in the forests as a reduction, or putting people in jail as a reduction, or something like that. Is it possible, or have you thought about how the ARB could actually come up with quantification or at least some qualitative set that shows real reductions are occurring or could occur from this or that type of program?
Well, I think that's really sort of an invitation to figure out how we're going to move on from where we are right now. And so I'll say a little bit more than I did before. First of all, we appreciated very much the work that Kara and her group at UCLA did on this topic. I think what they really helped to do was to sort of show how the risk of being out of compliance with various state directives in terms of how you could spend funds coming from AB 32 increases the further you get away from things that are directly targeted to the topic of reducing CO2 and greenhouse gases. So it's a continuum of risk from a lawyer's perspective, and the more tightly we tie the uses of the revenue to things that directly reduce emissions, the safer we are. And I think that's good advice to all of us who are going to be taking this the next step. What we have tried to do and what the governor's tried to do this year is to encourage the legislature to not spend the money before we have it. Let's wait until we've at least gotten through the first year's worth of allowance auctions and see how we actually have done, and then start to make some forward projections about what this revenue stream is going to look like. And of course, we now have a lot of interest in doing that. It does ramp up the first couple of years when we're beginning the program with only the large emitters under the program. We have an estimate that ranges, there's a high and medium and low estimate here, but we're talking about something like $500 million, which, although it's hardly trivial, is not going to save the state budget. By the time you bring in fuels under the cap in 2015, then you're talking about billions of dollars, and our estimates have been somewhere in the $4 to $6 billion range. Smart finance people immediately start thinking about not just what you could spend that money on as cash, but how you can take that projected revenue stream and use it to back up other investments that they want to make, including revenue bonds, for example, or other kinds of financing programs. So they're already sort of looking at all of those prospects. I personally hope that we can get people to understand that this is not a permanent source of revenue unless we do something different or in addition to just the cap and trade program. The idea is that we're going to run out of allowances and that the program, will come to an end. I mean, that by its own terms. So I don't want people to get dependent on cap and trade as the ongoing source of revenue to replace other revenue sources. That would be a problem for many reasons. But if it turns out that it can fund a diversity of programs that have real benefits in all parts of our state and to various sectors, I think that would be a good thing. I think that would really be a positive signal that getting off of our current dependence on high carbon fuels would be a helpful thing for the economy. And it could be a way of providing some really important seed funding for new technologies and new businesses in our state.
Thank you. And again, when the lawsuits come, I'm glad you're on our side.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Brett Orlando. I'm from Deutsche Bank. My question to you is about the timing of the program. There are a lot of people in the energy community and industrial community, many of which are our clients, who are deeply skeptical about whether or not this program will start on time next year. First the lawsuit last year, then the decision to postpone the cap and trade part until 2013, the recent announcement about postponing the August auctions until later this year, until November, and now in the last couple of weeks this lawsuit about offsets. Plenty of reasons to give those entities reasons to take pause and adopt a wait-and-see approach. So what would you say to those doubters about about whether or not this program will start on time next year.
Well, I'm not sure exactly what they're waiting for, since there's nothing really for them to do right at this moment. But I would encourage them to look at the trajectory and see that we have been marching forward at a steady pace. So, we have been very mindful of the need not to do anything to disrupt our energy system in California. I think if there's one fear that haunts any of us who were in California government or in any way involved with our energy system, it's the specter of what happened in 2000, 2001 when California went nuclear as far as deregulation of its electricity system was concerned, and ended up in a situation which was certainly risky to our businesses and our citizens in terms of the risk of blackouts and brownouts, but even more importantly was a career ender for a number of people, including our then governor, Gray Davis. So, we are not about to do anything that we feel is putting us in danger of doing anything like that ever again. We have learned at least some lessons from history. And so in every step of the way, we have tried to test the program, to vet it, to take input from the widest possible array of stakeholders, and then to figure out how best to next move forward. We have made changes in the program over time. When we first started down the path of designing a cap-and-trade program, which is when I came back into state government thanks to Governor Schwarzenegger, we had the Market Advisory Committee that wanted us to do a cap-and-trade program, which would have been most of the AB 32 implementation, and it would have been a program that would have been all auction, no free allowances, and many other features that have now changed into something quite different were part of that design. That was only a few years ago. For a government bureaucracy, I would say we're probably moving at lightning speed to get this thing going. But I think right now we're really at the point where the last pieces of the puzzle have to do with something that we have never done before, which is to create a private market and to do as much testing, simulation, modeling, and any other kind of assurance that we can come up with to ourselves and to those who will be affected by it, that this system will actually work the way it's intended to work. It doesn't mean that nobody will ever try to defraud it, or that we won't have to take action against it. But what I'm hoping for, of course, I believe that. Just to answer your question, I believe we're going to start on time. Don't worry about it, okay? Sorry, but let me just give a little bit larger answer here because I think it's important. We may have made a mistake or two along the way in some feature that we put into this, and we have to be willing to make changes and corrections as we need to along the way. That's worked for us throughout the history of our AIR program. We've been able to innovate because we can move a little bit faster maybe than the national government or some others do, and we don't always get it right the first time, but eventually we figure it out, and then we do make the changes. So to me, that's what Governor Schwarzenegger used to always call the sweet spot. The sweet spot, is we get to that point where you've got enough assurance that things are going forward, that people can make plans and rely on the fact that you're going to have the program, but at the same time, you can make changes as you need to along the way. Thank you for that question.
Well, I hope you've all enjoyed this conversation with Mary, and that she's represented the governor and herself, and all of you experts maybe know a little bit more. I'm going to ask Mary a final question, and then we'll conclude this morning's plenary, at least our part of it. So you get many of the same questions on the impact of AB 32, and is there anything that you feel is often overlooked that's really important that you'd like to convey to the audience, or is there any other final words or message you'd like to, it's kind of a free King's X question here, if you'd like to sum up something that we haven't talked about.
Well, I loved your question about the chocolates and croissant, and I have been thinking about how, working on AB 32 has been, for me personally, an opportunity to get involved in a program of a truly global scale and importance, and so for that alone, I guess I'd have to say it's been a great adventure. But actually, I think AB 32's genius, if you will, and again, I have to give credit to a lot of other people because I wasn't here at the time that I was not in an active role in any way. I was sitting at the university happily running an institute, when AB 32 passed. But the fact that the legislature was willing to set a firm goal with some strong guidance and then turn that over to a state agency based on their confidence in the agency's technical expertise and proven ability to run a complicated program was a magnificent thing. It was completely unlike, what Congress did when they started down the path with Waxman-Markey. AB 32 is a slim volume with a lot of general language and one bottom line, which is get back to 1990 emissions levels by 2020 and come up with a plan and tell us how you're going to do it. I mean, that's basically what the statute says. And in the time since then, of course, it built on the experience of the Pavley emission standards and California's long-term efforts in the area of vehicle and fuels, emissions requirements and so forth. But it was a huge undertaking, and it expanded our ARB's workload and scope of authority and interest many times over. It's forced all of us, I think, who work in the energy field to think in a whole new way from a well-to-wheels or life cycle perspective about what we're doing. But the scale of the problem requires that kind of thinking. And the fact that a bunch of California elected officials with the support of a lot of segments of the private sector, including companies like Chevron and PG&E and so forth, have been able to do this really just does make me feel proud about being a Californian. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it.